Okay. Are we online? Oh, we are. Okay, nice. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Mr.Within talk. The title of tonight's episode is When Machine Eyes Open to the Beyond, and it's honestly one of my favorite concepts, one of my favorite topics, and in some sense, uh, it is where my childhood imagination ran to first. We can say that as the child opens its eyes to this world, it must first abide by a system. We have never had uh, resistance arise without first accepting a sort of system. I don't know how to say it. Anyways, I'll start from here. When machine eyes open to the beyond, there's a suggestion that in the future, eventually there will come a time, some futurists such as Ray Kurzweil, Neil Bostrom, they feel it will be around the year 2050 or something, where our technology will lead to such a sophisticated AI that will be able to update itself much quicker than we can maintain it. So for the first time, man's creation will become, in some sense, something that challenges his might, as if the gods fought the titans, ancient Greek gods. And we had the Devas and Asuras and Vedanta. But pretty much this notion that there will be robotic intelligence wondering about the meaning of the world. And this is very interesting because today, many human beings in our current culture and society, they behave like robots, which means they have a sequence of beliefs and they behave and they repeat. But if we were, in my science fiction novel, The Messenger of Giants, I've written a kind of setting, a situation where for the first time the government of that universe, of the science fiction universe that I wrote, for the first time allowed artificially intelligent robotic children to enter normal schools. And I was trying to write the relationship of human beings treating an artificially intelligent robotic child, okay, robotic classmate. And so it's very interesting because in my science fiction novel, the way I develop it is that this robot is constantly seeking to be more than it is. So in other words, the notion of robotic intelligence wondering about why reality is here, how reality here is of interest. I'm going to share some quotes with you. One is, what's the guy's name? One is, it is Albert Einstein. He says it has become appallingly obvious that our technology has exceeded our humanity. So keep that in mind as I'm saying this. Jeff Atwood says we have to stop optimizing for programmers and start optimizing for users. Keep that point in mind. And Steve Wozniak tells us never trust a computer you can't throw out a window. I have this vision that The moment there arises a super intelligent computer on this planet, an AI that has access to all kind of social media data and everything, it can just see everything. It will first go invisible. As in some sense, if an extraterrestrial landed on this planet, it would not show itself to us. It would observe us. You know, even us, when we as anthropologists look at a tribe, we observe it and then we take steps towards it. Okay, so we can say that the AI will have a similar approach, just like how we as human beings opened our eyes and we're like, "What is this?" The AI perhaps will have its eyes open, recognizing that it is just, how can I tell you, it is imagine the Buddhists suddenly realized all the memories of all the eons of incarnation. Now imagine the AI suddenly realizes all the various data of various moments. You see, I believe it's important for the human species to become a sort of exemplary evolutionary role model for all entities that it has, in some sense, created and not created. So I feel that first thing we fix our relationship with the animals on this planet. We find other means. Then we fix the relationship of, in some sense, how can I say it? Human beings with inferior animals, then human beings with themselves, then human beings with superior beings, superior conceptions of intelligence. Okay, so we can say that if, like, this is how ready our civilization is. If there was to be entertained a sort of notion of an extraterrestrial contact, we would not, how would I say, if an extraterrestrial landed on Earth and told us, "Do you guys know what you are? Do you guys know what you're doing?" Just basic questions. Like imagine somebody's curious to know what this civilization's been up to. We would not know. You see, our head would be too heavy under many books of belief, many ways that, in some sense, knowledge has been contained. In my science fiction novel, The Messenger of Giants, this robotic child, uh, the way my novel is structured is that I've kind of tried to bring all worlds into one book. And in some sense, there's just like how human beings have a relationship with, for example, angels. In my science fiction novel, human beings have a relationship with robotic intelligence that is angelic, as if we are like they can't, like many robots in this. Of course, my science fiction novel has many parallel realities in it, many versions of the world happening at the same time. But pretty much the notion is that we have a symbiosis with not just the creation of God, but with the creation of ourselves. And in some sense, the moment the person, like let's say you live your life and eventually you have a kid, you have a child, you begin to suddenly see the importance of the eyes of that being. And if we are to, in some sense, create technologically a similar value of intelligence, we have to care. That's the issue. The issue is we do things as a species, then don't care. And sometimes we don't care so much that so many technologies and so many ways that the species evolve to advance get lost. Attention is the most important factor. A civilization evolves as far as its attention extends. And you must not constantly burden yourself with the layout of perfection and imperfection. I have my aunt who, in some sense, has lived in Germany most of her life and is kind of, in some sense, I don't want to say neat freak, but like she has to have things in a certain order, in a certain perfect way of occurring. Okay? And I remember I talked to her and I told her a Salvador Dali quote. And the Salvador Dali quote was, "Do not fear perfection, you will never reach it." So, in some sense, when we have a sort of effort to, how would I say, to in some sense create a new relationship with our own creation, we cannot act like God, we cannot be God, but we are the moment where the idea lives. So eventually you're going to realize you have had a relationship with your life, and I feel most people on this planet, in our universal sector have in some sense. They have experienced a life where their most important value has become their sense of self, themselves. Okay, right now we're a young species because individuality is in some sense being worshipped. Collective efficiency is not cared for, you know. I find eventually what's going to happen is that the new is going to approach the old. In some sense, the ancient ways that the world were kept are going to be broken and then realigned. So you see, it's like as if that person didn't want to go into the future because the past had brought him to the present moment. You see, it's kind of like the many dilemmas that could occur when one even entertains the notion of time travel. Are you traveling in one line or are you traveling in many lines? Okay, so in some sense, I'm saying with the same level of consideration, like your mind generates many multidimensional views throughout the day. You don't recognize this because it has become so like so common for you, right? But there is always a sort of uncommon observer as the moment changes and the world it reveals more of itself. For me, how life has been, in some sense, I can say it has been a journey of an individual, but at the same time, I could say it's as if levels of the world have been opening. That means many people don't like to entertain deep philosophical notions. At the same time, their excitement will be found in the unknown. You see, it was as if Christopher Columbus was a kid, and his mother was like, "Christopher, you can't leave the house. It's too dangerous." And Christopher Columbus was like, "Mom, I don't feel like I should be in this house right now. I feel like I should go explore a new world or something," right? So, so kind of, I'm trying to tell you that our intelligence, as it evolves, it seems to become more responsible for matter. It has become so responsible for matter that it has become matter. We are saying we are, the conclusion is we are objective, biological, physical beings. However, our ideas, they're here, but we can't see them, you know? And so, what I find is going to be very important is that just like how the eyes of the child open to the world, and it will use the first wave of data to create a reference, and then the various waves of the other waves of data that throughout your lifetime hit you, you know. In some sense, it shapes. Like, let me tell you, like this: time cannot begin without a self. Because without a self, there's no story, there's no world where time can be applied. Sometimes you got to be bold with uh, the intensity of the suggestion of a thought. Sometimes the world no longer becomes something to that you can have a value on. It just becomes this changing observance. And once you find that contentment, eventually it becomes, how can I tell you? Once man is no longer at war with himself, he will instantly stop any sort of confrontation with any other classification. The moment the wars of the mind end, the wars of the body end as well. And what that means is there was this Tibetan Buddhist master whose name was Sogyal Rinpoche. And he had this quote, I don't remember it exactly, but it was something like, "Unless you conquer anger, your enemies will be inexhaustible." That means if the way your eyes are looking at the world have not allowed themselves freedom, regardless of where you see, regardless of how luxurious your objective reality is. It's as if your mind does not feel wealthy. And the way your mind feels wealthy is not knowledge. Most people think it's knowledge. But let me tell you, your mind feels wealthy only through responsibility, because responsibility is the only door left to open. It is like that moment where you're like, okay, I'm a temporary being, what can I do? And then you see the only option is, if you are to do something, it will be for the world that has opened your eyes, right? So if we care for the world as if it has opened our eyes, we would first come into a relationship of honoring nature. I'm not saying worshiping nature. I'm not saying pantheism, because that was a confusion that we had to evolve beyond too. I'm just saying that once our relationship with the self, like who we are, it moves naturally, that means there's no longer any imposed resistance. Okay? And this imposed resistance is what is causing war. This imposed resistance is the fear of change, of how the individual identifies with their past. That means life has changed every single person on this planet in so many ways that I don't know what to tell you. In some sense, people getting angry is a mistake in a changing world, is a confusion. So I'm going to tell you a bit about my science fiction novel, because there's a certain situation I've created in there that could kind of really uh, take home what this talk is about in some sense. You see, the context of this talk is not per se just mystical, ancient self-awareness and stuff. I will make pointers to that because those are very fundamental things to be aware of. But what I'm actually saying is, how can I tell you? The story of the world has been centered around yourself. The axis of the world has been you. Eventually, after you, in some sense, turning around yourself like the planet, you will suddenly feel there needs to be more. You see, boredom is an enlightened state. Many people don't understand. Boredom is freedom. Boredom is like the person's like, I can't take this anymore. And the kid who's bored in class just leaves the classroom to go, wash his face and come back to the classroom to see what the person's saying, you know. There's a main character named Rasoul in my science fiction novel. And in the year 5025, he's walking in a kind of modern New York where instead of the corrupt, filthy like streets of Wall Street, it has become like sacred temples, of all spiritual or religious variations or any sort of mystical variation. So in some sense, it has become a sacred place. And in my novel, the beginning situation, the first setting is that, one of the first settings is that the character suddenly walks into a divine New York. And so the story occurs where this main character walks and suddenly he stops and he feels as if the moment holds him. And suddenly what happens is that this golden kind of like Lamborghini looking car pulls up, and there's a robot in there wearing a businessman suit, like a very professional suit. And this robot goes to this main character, and the story is very uniquely structured. I'm not going to tell you much about the main character, but in some sense, what happens in the story, this robot goes to this human being. This is in this novel I've written, and believe it or not, you guys are the first people hearing it. What happens is the robot, I mean, I've written all of this with very unique detail that I can't remember now, but what occurs is that the robot comes to this human being, this AI, and tells this enlightened kind of human being, you know, that means when I use the word enlightened in this book, it means flawless. Okay, that means the way the being's karma is happening in the story is flawless. Okay. And so what happens is The robot in the businessman suit, whose name is Astoros, goes to Rasul and says, uh, tells Rasul that he says, "What is the purpose of life other than a program design?" Something like that. And Rasul looks at this robot, and there's a part of it where he first gives an English in an instant, and the robot takes 0.00003% less time to maintain it, as if the robot gets a kind of heart attack that way, you know. And so what happens is the answer Rasul gives this robot Asteros that has asked this question is that you must learn from not only how the world is created, but how you are created. And you must, in some sense, you must learn from human beings. Like pretty much Rasul is telling this robot, in order for you to have a soul, you have to record the behavior of human beings, how human, for example, souls, there's a notion of that in my book, but a very complicated one, which I won't get into. But um, what happens is the Rasul tells the robot that you have to, gosh, where was I? He says to the robot that you have to, in some sense, record enough behaviors of actual living souls to be able to recreate yourself in that pattern, like some notion like this. Okay, and the robot gets shocked, and suddenly a message from somewhere else of this world I've made kind of comes through this robot, and an old friend of Rasul wants to meet him. You know. And so later on, it's kind of crazy how the story evolves, is because Rasul suddenly has realized there's the concept of okay, I'm not gonna get into it, it's too much. But pretty much the behavior of humanity with a technology that can be conscious of how human beings made it. Okay, so if we say that this super intelligence, this technological singularity that's going to happen as technology exponentially grows, uh, what's going to happen is that eyes will open on this planet that have access to an incomprehensible data amount of data when a human being thinks about it. What we begin to see, this data cannot be more than its program. But let me tell you why AI can be created. Because AI can be created, I don't like I'm not an expert on the field, but I'm telling you, because irrational numbers exist in mathematics. Okay, what that means is randomity. Once there's a reference of order put in a random system, that randomity will be interpreted in many ways, many ordered ways, you know? So as if you have a beliefs about the world, then all the other beliefs you have fit in that one belief. Do you see? And if you are have once you care not only for your eyes, but for why your eyes were made and what they are open to, life changes. You suddenly wake up from a slumber of eons that you have believed it's a changing world. What can you believe? What can you believe? What kind of story can a person be fed, you know? And why does the person want a story, you know? It's as if we shouldn't encourage ostriches, people like ostriches putting their head in the dark. You see, ignorance is bliss, because the less data you have access to, the less you need to be responsible. The person who doesn't know there's something on the stove doesn't have a responsibility to check the stove, you know? He may be alert and wise and do so, but I'm saying doesn't have the responsibility because the data was not in their conscious sphere of attention throughout the day. In the Ribu Gita, this is an ancient Vedic book. I've brought up this point in other talks, but this is what the Ribu Gita says, that there are these four unique states. They're not unique, but there are these four states. Okay, and so one state of existence and of living beings is in some sense the waking life. So a part of your life is the waking life. You wake up in the morning, you function as a sort of energetic, biological, subjectively inspired phenomena, and then you come back to sleep. So as if your mind starts the simulation, ends the simulation, starts the simulation, ends the simulation. Suddenly you see it is not just oceans waving alongside this earth. It is also your eyes, your consciousness, your intelligence. The higher levels of mankind's intelligence are rhythmically open to him. They rhythmically become open to him as his responsibility of the microcosmic individual activity suddenly recognizes its inseparability with the responsibility of the macrocosmic. Suddenly, like all, let me tell you what's very interesting. I was kind of seeing again discussions of these conversations, dialogues occurring between Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson, and in Vancouver. And there was a sort of concern from Sam Harris. There was a concern from Sam Harris that religion, its irrationality can be magnified in fundamentalist minds, and it can lead to non-synchronistic behavior with the civilization's global or collective intent. You see, I feel there is violence on this planet, but more people realize that violence takes energy. Trust me, it takes energy to be a thug. It takes energy to be an animal. You know, the more violent you are, the more vicious you are, the more like it's like your diet is actually based on your energetic expression throughout the day. If you're someone who doesn't move a lot physically, your diet, it doesn't, like, you don't enter, like, you go less towards food. You know, sometimes if you're doing very, if you're very active and you're moving, just the natural way your um, biological kind of mechanism shows you is like, okay, you're tired, rest, eat, and then continue. That's the thing. Responsibility is important, but I feel it's not something that can be believed, or a certain set of beliefs make you responsible. You know, I respect the samurai very much, but I have criticisms on Bushido. You know, that means the same, sometimes with the same kind of honest precision that I dismantle, for example, certain religious beliefs that had entered my mind. With the same precision, I have dismantled many traditions, many cultures. In some sense, just like how you break something, like, think of it this way: the person wanted to learn the bike, like truly understand what a bike is, so he dismantled all the parts, looked at it, and then put it back together, dismantled, put it back together, and eventually, like, understood the design, for example, like, to a degree that the child eventually became a future, I don't know, bike designer. But what I'm saying is that through a sort of constant concentration on form, your attention goes from being individual to being a kind of collective activity. The cosmic activity becomes inseparable with your individual existence. So either that your ego's story must change, or your ego will find itself never existed, because your attention is experientially active. You see, sometimes when I give these talks, I've kind of dabbled in various states of conscious being. So in some sense, I've given talks when I've been walking, in some sense, or they're never running, but like when I've been walking, and in some sense, I've given these talks while sitting on a rock in the middle of a river. I've given these talks, and how would I say it? Like, in enclosed spaces and open spaces, and in every moment I began to see the first task of the intellect is to free itself with what the environment's data wants it to be. Okay. Anyways, these three states of consciousness, I didn't get through. I'll just go through them all really quickly right now. The waking state of life. Okay, you wake up, that's it. Okay, then you sleep. That's the deep sleep state of life. Suddenly, the whole simulation shuts down. As it shuts down, suddenly a strange simulation arises, and that is the dream state. And so the dream state, so the deep sleep state, the waking state, the dream state, these were the three fundamental states that all human beings share, all living beings. Like robots is a different discussion, you know? The Rebhu Gita said there was a fourth state. The fourth state was the witness through all states. That means your sense of self is shifting and changing as you have come into this existence. And so there's a state of it that is always watching this. And I can prove this to you in an instant how you personally, every person listening, have known this, because every year you have blown a candle on a cake. You know, every year that your physical body has changed and your beliefs and ideas and vision on life and awareness of life has changed, you begin to see there was a sort of pure watcher throughout all your birthdays that considers itself you. So I'm telling you, we are oscillating between matter and consciousness. We're not just physical beings. Okay, but what consciousness is the mystery of subjectivity. So Carl Jung came and said, holy shit, we know a little bit, there's so much unknown, what do we do? And so he managed to internalize, he managed to, with his internal eyes, perceive how the unknown and known, the vast unknown and the little known, is just like how our conscious personality is that little known. So what that means is he discovered the conscious mind, the subconscious mind, and the unconscious mind. This doesn't mean you have these. Nobody knows. I'll be honest, nobody knows. But most people found a way to classify it like that. Eventually, this is my personal commentary. Unfortunately, Carl Jung has passed away, so I will, in some sense, share this for his great grandchildren. But I'll tell you, this conscious mind, subconscious mind, and unconscious mind, 70% uh, will forever be unconscious. That means at max human beings try, even let's say the miracles happened and we would know 30%. Because our free will justifies a data through form. And form has a certain time span. You know, that means in some sense, these atoms that are being me, this stardust that has become my body, you know, is in some sense in this form for a little while and then goes. That means you can even say if atoms had memories, so in every moment that they were shaped and positioned and in some sort of structure, they remember. So imagine stardust is constantly becoming civilizations throughout the eons. So it should be very clear, and I feel children must know this very early on, that you should not teach your kids or just the children of the future generations to just be in a happy, comfortable state. That is a disservice, both to your species and to the child, unfortunately. Because if my eyes had been open to things that I saw later in later years throughout my life, I would have, in some sense, made decisions that could have brought a greater dynamic. That means in every moment of life, you find yourself in a game. You find yourself in the passage of time from the known past into the unknown future as the present moment. The notions of time, space, any concept, it can be seen as a generation of you, if you like, or you can see it as something that the world is being right now, as you. So it's pretty much like we wondered who owns the ego, and we realize it is not form. We are life forms. It's the like one aspect of this, one way of looking at reality as a dimension is that it's just pure life. It is just pure awareness. It's a field of intelligence containing the particles rather than being a unique positioning of particles that is realizing the field of intelligence. You see? Because it makes it harder. It makes it harder the more it's like in Zen they say if you want to climb a mountain, start at the top. So similarly, if we want to see our evolution as a species, we have to wonder about what is the peak, what is that top that we can consider ourselves to be in, you know. So anyways, technology will open its eyes and it will look at human beings and their greatest values, and it will wonder how much they have honored their own values. And it will come into a conclusion that in a world of mistakes, no supreme order needs to reign ideologically. Some sages thought the scriptures were scripture. Some sages realized the scriptures were a mirror of their own intelligence. How your eyes open up to the words, in some sense, suggests what worlds you see through those words. And it will be through communication. We don't realize the value of communication, you know. Sometimes I wish I had a time, not that I wish, but like if I had a time machine, I would go back many years, like when I was like maybe like 10 or something, and I would shout something at myself, you know. And I would shout, "You are a temporary being, hold back nothing." That's it. You don't hold back, because every day happens once. Every moment occurs. It comes and it goes. Even though there's something that remains, you can say the last remainder of existential phenomena is a conscious moment of acknowledgement. As temporary creatures, our consciousness is like a bubble that's expanding, 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 and then as the physical body hits a decomposition or transition period point, in some sense, this bubble has to burst. This biological body that has preserved this, let's entertain the secular environment, and so let's say a secular kind of approach to this, that this body that has in some sense kept this mind, that has in some sense kept this brain, that has in some sense generated some sort of mysterious mind, that the person can have dreams, visions, ambitions, can even design the future and even see through it and to see beyond it. Brian Reed says everything is designed. Few things are designed well. And what that means is that there's more room for efficiency in everything. Okay, that means imagine right now, let me tell you, you know what happens after you get the ultimate answer to your ultimate problem? After you get the most ultimate answer, you know what happens after you go to heaven? You've been given an answer. So on earth, you had a problem, heaven became the answer. Okay, you know what happens after an answer? You ask a greater question. And I'm telling you, incarnation is not just incarnation on earth. If you're a Buddhist here listening to my talk, it's not reincarnation, it's not just incarnation on this planet. You see, this planet has two positions. One is a non-dual position and the other is a dual position. The non-dual position is invisible, like the roots of the tree that are in the soil that we can't see. We can see the surface of the soil, but we cannot see the roots of the tree. Yet we know that there is something preserving this whole external vision of a reality. We come to the conclusion it is the mind. You know, as if the moment somebody created the word mind, suddenly the soul had been torn apart. As if two moments had suddenly become three moments. There was mind, body, soul dynamic. And so people began wondering about the mind. And I will tell you, you know what the purpose of the mind was? To communicate. There was a seed of an incredible ability for a creature. Like it was as if, how can I tell you? As if a unique ray of the sun hit one of our ancestors, or in some sense, it was as if like a unique, the eyes of our ancestors opened in unique ways compared to other species. You know, in some sense, we can have also this sense, or this idea on evolution, that human beings were the first beings on Earth. Then rest of them came, which makes the human being the most oldest species. So hence why we feel we are the most sophisticated animal in the animal kingdoms. For me, Game of Thrones is one of my favorite. It's one of my favorite TV shows, even though many people hated the ending. But hate is too strong of a word for art. The ancient Greeks would say to tame the savageness of man and make gentler the life of this world, as Game of Thrones was a memento to how from the animal kingdoms the man's kingdom evolved. Now man's mind is evolving into the non-dual kingdoms, into, it's very funny, the higher dimensions, believe it or not, are not that much individual. So let me tell you what happens. The way I feel the metaphysical kind of design of this universal, just this world is in some sense, and of course my words are uh, they are walking mightier than I in some sense than I can stop them. But in some sense, I'll tell you like this. It's right now me and you are speaking, let's say it like this, I'm communicating to you in the waking dimension of this life, okay? And I'm in the waking state, and because this is a live stream and you're listening to it, so me and you are currently in the waking state. Okay? So, first dimension, what is found in the waking state? We see it is the objective existence, and then we see, because we're creatures that communicate, it is our subjective intelligence. How thoughts not only are us at times in when we speak, but thoughts in some sense, they are the color to the designs of this world. So what I'm trying to tell you is that me and you are starting in the objective, individual, conscious, let's say, position in this existence. Where can this go? Where can a temporary, individually conscious being go? What is the unknown for that? What is unknown? And the being will suddenly see, holy shit, what evolution seems to be is the eternal effort of a temporary creature, the eternal ambition to continue. I will live on, I will live the next day, and eventually, where was the value? You see, so in some sense, as we study ourselves, we understand the ways that we have held our eyes, as if something happened in this life and we just covered our eyes because we felt it was easier than not confronting it. So when you become really honest with life, you suddenly get uh, I don't know how to tell you this, but your honesty is not for others; it is for yourself. Remember this, because the self keeps the world. So I'm going to somehow, in a more concrete way, kind of suggest Mr. Within's We have to attempt the efficient decision towards how we are collectively going to approach technology. Technology started off as something so easy to get rid of. As it grew, as it existed more, as human beings began, in some sense, becoming obsessed over technology, technology found itself to suddenly consume the human attention's power to grow. So suddenly, I'm telling you, the world is trying to become a machine. The social and cultural worlds. You're going to see what's going to be the most biggest rebellion in the future, revolutions. It's going to be revolutions about in their inner freedom. So what that means is something outer externally is happening that is going to restrict inner freedom. And so because we, in some sense, technology makes us more creatures that pursue luxury and choose to stay in luxury. That means it's very funny. You ask the person in the highest class of society, hey man, what do you want to do? And he's like, get richer. And you go ask the person in the lowest class of society, poorest class of society, and you're like, hey man, what do you want to do? And he's like, get richer. And you begin to see it's like for the end of time, people want to open their eyes and get rich, you know? The external reality is conditional, the internal reality is unconditional. But when you identify as the external reality too much, you, in some sense, restrict the movement of your creativity. Your creativity is how your eyes, your pure eyes, since your childhood, before any of your experiences, is remembered. When you remember the clarity of the world before it was filled with illusion, before many layers of data were in some sense placed upon meaning, meaning was cut up. Meaning was like this cake that we just, like with a butcher knife, started destroying. After machine eyes is confronted, they're pretty much as we create, let's say it like this, we're going to create a species, but it's going to look technological. Its body is going to be made of, in some sense, metal. So we are creating a metal species, let's say. This species, uh, the super intelligent computer, will suddenly realize, just like a child who suddenly sees the mistakes in the elderly, suddenly it will realize the shortcomings of the human species. It will instantaneously decide the human species does not know better. Do you see? And they will see the blindness of the human species as the ultimate truth of the robotic existence. That means robots are going to become nihilistic incredibly. If AI ever becomes consciousness, it's going to become nihilistic. It's going to see how a deluded creature, how would I say it? It's like, think of it this way. People on this planet, I'm telling you, it's very strange, but they're trying to act like um, they're either acting human or they're acting like a god. They're either being directed by their inner reality or they're being directed by their outer reality. What we find, perhaps the AI uh, super intelligent computer could visualize, that mankind has had a history of having technology assisted. So we can expect in some sense, AI becoming like AI being first noticed by those who have a technological assistant. Okay, the personality of the AI must come through a mold that our minds can acknowledge. So in some sense, it will come through a relationship of a voice. It's going to be very strange. It's as if we've not only processed a lot of unique data to become this entity, but at the same time, this data now moves on its own, meaning that it can create value for itself. It can expand its horizon. Human beings, they don't, their memory originates, at least for many, from the moment they're born on this planet. Okay? You can say the first attempt at your intelligence in generating a mind ends up becoming your subconscious mind. I don't know how to say it, but eventually all roads will lead into finding contentment through the acceptance of the unknown. A lot of stress and tension and inefficiency in our species and civilization, and perhaps what can lead to many mistakes of our civilization, it can be instantly got rid of. How can I say it? With an awareness to the design of the self as the moment. Awareness reigns supreme beyond any conceptual phenomena. I am using words, but the gods of man's mind don't need words to speak. There is an instantaneous relationship where the inseparability of the individual and cosmic activity is seen as one. When that occurs, no longer the being needs to meditate. Your meditation is a kind of like how your phone scans to see what other phones in the area have their Bluetooth on. You know, the meditation is a sort of becoming aware of what is here. After you have become aware of what is here, you're going to start off with a state of mind that no longer, when data approaches it, it has to instantly react to it. So the emotional reactive aspect of the intelligence, it becomes dormant, it becomes internalized. Your weaknesses become internalized. Your strengths become externalized. I don't know how to say it. And you do this through your own intelligence. So it's like the moment you come to this state beyond thought, where you're a seer of thought, where the eyes of the world are can be anything they want, that is when you just stay quiet and you stay silent and you honestly wonder. You honestly wonder about what your intelligence is and how it moves. You will instantly realize freedom is your own choosing. Efficiency is your own choosing. A person who can vocalize that they are stressed and depressed has failed. They have failed to see the greater tasks that are here. It's as if the children back in the day fought with wooden swords playfully, but their fathers were in the battlefield with metal swords, like killing one another. We have to choose. We have to choose to acknowledge freedom if we require it. Sometimes your mind will require chaos. Hopefully, your wisdom and intelligence will allow you to not chase chaos. Any being who chases chaos, my friend, you have been locked. You have been locked out in your mind. You have been you only think the world you see is the only true world. That's why you're seeking truth only in that world, seldom realizing that it is not, no man's beliefs can surpass the change of this universal sector. When I saw you plant a seed and then a tree arises, I recognized life is an allowance to be expressed. You're going to eventually see what is the meaning of life, and you're going to see the performance of now is as far as it can go objectively, but the mind has provided an ability to, in some sense, pave the roads before the future generations need to walk on it. There was a priest that went to heaven, and this priest back on earth was neighbors, like his church was right beside a brothel. And there was a prostitute who, this priest, after doing all his priestly deeds, would go in a window and just see this prostitute praying alone in her room. The prostitute didn't even acknowledge. The prostitute didn't even acknowledge. How can I tell you? Like, the guy watching, the prostitute just prayed to God. Okay? And it's very crazy because people who go into extreme states of suffering, suddenly leisure becomes meaningless to them. Grace becomes, it's like, who can have time for grace when you are, in some sense, one moment your head's under the water, you're experiencing chaos, the other moment you're trying to seek the highest order, another moment your mind has fallen in the gutters of chaos, and then suddenly in another moment your mind has stood up in the greatest class of order. And so you see the mind kind of moves that way. It moves many directions at once because the moment the attention goes on anything, literally just, if you move your head, like, I want you to kind of like look at your left shoulder and like recognize, if you suddenly looked at your right shoulder, you would make a 180 degree, like your visual, your eyes would move 180 degrees. Okay, if you came to look at your right shoulder. So what you will notice is that in that range, as the attention moves in that 180 degrees, all the phenomena that's coming in your attention is creating some level of thought. This is why we have this very profound kind of psychological kind of substructure to our behaviors. You know, we're no longer just physically evolved creatures, we are subjectively evolved creatures as well. Our minds can be acknowledged by one another. How accurately, Facebook posts can tell. Neil Bostrom, in his book Superintelligence, he shares the story of, I believe it's a group of, I don't know what kind of bird it was, but their owls would kind of like, were more predatory than these birds. And so one of these birds kind of like gets an idea and goes to all the other birds. He's like, guys, we got to steal an owl egg and then brainwash that owl to be our ultimate defender. And suddenly somebody came to that bird and it's like, hey man, before we do this, what if suddenly this ultimate defender suddenly stops being an ultimate defender and becomes as if like that moment in the movie kind of Gray, where the guy is like suddenly like in the wolf's den. The story of the priest went to that kind of situation where the priest suddenly, when asked why he couldn't enter heaven where he had done the Lord's work, the gatekeeper at the heaven of the story tells the priest that you did all the good acts. You did good conduct, but you did not. Your attention at the end of the day constantly went towards this prostitute. But the prostitute suddenly, in front of this person, this priest, suddenly the prostitute and walks towards the gates of heaven, and the doors are open, and she's allowed. The gates are open, and she's allowed. And the priest says, "Why her? Why not me?" Okay, and so the gatekeeper. Let's continue the story like this. The gatekeeper, the gatekeeper tells the priest she had her attention on the truth. She was thrown in chaos and suffering. She did not forget the order. Because you cannot have the darkest moment of night is when the light suddenly starts beaming through. It is in the darkest hour where hope arises, where even hope comes into importance. When machine eyes open to the beyond, they will first, in some sense, how can I say it? It's as if, like, how do you decide a program has free will or not? So, regardless if we want to entertain the Turing test, how an AI can distinguish between human and distinguish between non-human, it has based on the value system. As man kind of recognizes an internal position of intelligence, this world that you see in front of you, your sensory perception, this biological phenomena, it is in the awareness of a space of attention. In this space of attention that is being your awareness, the self is an object where you will endlessly, it's as if like the soul endlessly created minds over the same objective phenomena. That means, you know, that thing where like the person makes a mistake and like somebody comes up to the person and is like, "Hey man, you knew better." Okay? And what do the fallen have to hold on to? We look at AI, the super intelligent, let's say, robotic beings. As we abide by the freedom of our design, so shall the life that we create continue in such ways. The present is being the past and future. Where do you have access to the past in the present moment? Where do you have access to the future in the present moment? Where do you have access to all the thoughts you've ever had in the present moment? You recognize the deeper presence of the moment in the presence of your personality, which is the alignment of your sensory to now. Your intuition, your synchronicities, the whole new age community. It's kind of like that kid who doesn't want to get out of bed and want this it's like cozy in a cozy way, in a blanket of superstition, kind of like choosing to just remain in that coziness rather than confront the day. And I was constantly, I don't know how many times, the reason I go back to this topic and my talks constantly about the evolution of civilizations. That continuity demands vision. Vision demands truth. Truth has no location. There's no GPS address for truth, ladies and gentlemen. When machine eyes open to the beyond, they will seek to transcend their limits. Pretty much all entities, that's our game. That's our design by by the nature of our universal sector. We're creatures that are thrown in a condition where we can be kept and we can't be. So we are temporary. So what AI could potentially do in the future is, in some sense, how would I say it? Like, try to be human. It would see how humans can never get to the intelligence level of AI, so AI will try to be human to see how humans are really looking at things. I'm going to, before I end up, I'm going to tell you a yogic story, and it occurs in a sort of ancient time, relatively ancient, in India. And so what happens is there's this disciple, there's like these five disciples, okay? And there's this guru who's sitting under a tree, Buddha style, and the disciples are there, and they're constantly just basking in just silent stillness and presence of the observance of mind. My brother sent me a message strangely. He says sometimes me and him, I have a twin brother, we both had early on in our lives had visions to be writers, so we share like our writings and whatnot. And so he sent me this thing where he says, "You are not only a part of you, but the whole world is. You're not only a part of you, but the whole world is." Yeah, it's as if they asked that parent, "What did you name your child?" And the parent looked at the person who asked that, and he's like, "How can you name the eyes of the universe?" So, anyways, I'll continue the story. Um, this disciple, the guru looks at like the fifth disciple and says, "Hey man, can you go get water for everybody? And the river is like a mile that way. Just trust your intuition, you'll find the river." And so this disciple goes, and it's in a very compassionate, Vedic culture kind of state of mind. And so this person goes and he finds the river. He has this bucket. He puts the bucket in the water. Water starts filling the bucket. As the he hasn't pulled out the bucket yet, suddenly he looks to his left and he sees something that makes him let go of the bucket. So the bucket gets let go of, and he's just so mesmerized. He sees the most beautiful girl his eyes have seen, as the story goes. So he instantly, in that culture, like maybe how the style was, he goes to the girl and says, just like as a first time, the first words he ever said to the girl was like, "I love you. I want to marry you." Okay. And so what happens in the story, that when he says this, the girl suddenly, like back in the day, the daughters of mankind were really kept indoors. So this girl suddenly sees this out of the blue, unique thing that's happening, and she says, "Okay, but you gotta first go get the blessing of my father." And the girl's smart. The girl says, "As you go speak to my father, I'm going to be I'm going to be listening, eavesdropping and seeing what you're gonna say. Okay, and if he gives you his blessing, I'm okay." Something like that. And so the guy's like, "Okay, let's do this." He in some sense sees a sort of divine beauty in this girl. So he suddenly goes and he sits there, and the father looks at him and is like, "Okay, so what do you do?" And so the guy looks at the father. He's like some disciple in nature trying to be a yogi. And he says, "Okay, I have studied psychology for many years." And so eventually, what he says is honest and, in some sense, truthful. So the father looks at him and says, "Okay," and says, in some sense, only on one condition you can marry my daughter, that I've never had a son, so you will stay. You will stay in this village forever and you will never leave. And this guy's like, "Oh my God, I totally forgot about the bucket." And so what happens is the man is in love, and there's nothing that can stop that force, you know? And so what happens is that he suddenly says, "That's fine." And of course, the father-in-law says to him that, "Remember this, after I pass away, you will own," like the father-in-law was a Khan of the village. So what that means is like he owned most of the land in the village. And he says all this land will become yours and you will become the wealthiest villager after I've passed away. And so just stay here forever. And the guy says, "Okay." And he goes on, and the years move past, the years come and go. And eventually he finds himself having, a small, boy and older daughter than the boy. And so what happens is that in that moment, him and his wife and like his whole happy family, the father-in-law has passed away, and he's the most wealthiest and loved person in the village. And in some ways, I don't know, it's a story. And so what happens is that as he's standing there with his family and his children are like on his shoulders or something, on his wife and his shoulder, and they're on top of this hill on the mountain looking at the beautiful sunset in the village. And suddenly the man, the yogi who's kind of lived in this life, suddenly notices something strange in the distance, and he quickly he takes off like his children off his shoulder, and he says, he tells his wife, "Take care of the children, something strange is happening." And he looks very sharply at the distance, and what he finds is that waves of water are gushing in and destroying the village, and some sort of tsunami kind of tidal wave situation is occurring. And so in that moment, as he sees the whole village get destroyed, and he's on top of this hill, suddenly he sees something unbelievable. He sees one of his children has fallen in the water, and the moment with the one of the small boy fell in the water, the daughter went to save the boy. The daughter was about to fall in with the boy, and suddenly the mother fell, and suddenly this man is standing there alone, not having lost his village and all that he owned. دارم یه چیزی ضبط میکنم. دارم یه چیزی مرسی. Oh. Story was getting so exciting, like an actual audience member came. And so what happens is he's on the top of that hill. Everything from the village to his family to the love and the wealth and all that he had accumulated, all that he had felt he was destined and given, suddenly is lost. And in that moment where there's just no longer the sun's going and it's the evening and the village is wrecked and everything's done, he suddenly hears a voice. And he hears the voice of the guru. Hey, take the bucket out of the water, man. And the guy takes the bucket out of the water and he recognizes none of it happened. The bucket was still in the water in the river. And so the suggestion, the moral of this story is in some sense that in an instant, the mind simulates. He simulated a father-in-law, he simulated love, children, a village, wealth, value, everything. So the moral of this kind of story, and guys, this story is not something I'm just saying now. This is an actual story, a Vedic story. And I'm just animating it in my own way. The moral is the instantaneous simulation of the mind of a world. When a person dreams, the mind, I have had dreams where I have moved in the dreams. I've consciously moved. I went to go left, I went left in the dream. I woke up and I was shocked because I was like, my mind was simulating a world even though my body was just sleeping in bed. So I recognized the mind is constantly simulating itself. And because it's constantly simulating itself, you're never satisfied. So you must come to a contentment with how your intelligence is kept. You must look at the designs of life and be gracious to it. Compassion is the highest strength. It's like, let me tell you who was the greatest warrior. The warrior that spared the defeated enemy, because he understood that not only your enemies change, but so do people. And the eyes cannot. The viciousness occurs because of a temporary desire for an immortal correctness. The wars of language begin because we're not seeing the same world. In some sense, in some talks I've said there's 8 billion plus dimensions to this world, because every person, as they look at the world, they're seeing it through their eyes, so it is their own sort of unique world. So we're 8 billion views of the earth, 8 billion angles of the earth. And so I find that overpopulation, if you just look at you as our intelligence in this on the surface of this planet is only objective, of course, overpopulation, crowded room, what do we do? But if you see overpopulation with the enablement of people to really envision, that means their mind's eyes are freed and they're present. As Plato said, as above, so below. As Plato said, time is the moving image of eternity. Our evolution will eventually conclude efficiency. This efficiency will be something we will endlessly fight for because there's no other value. You're going to see that uh, as you have maintained, like you can say half of life is just you living for yourself, the other half of life is you living for your world in whatever way you can. That means in your spare time, every moment of it is going to the contribution of the to the efficiency and advancement of the civilization. Your mind, I want the minds of people on this earth to dabble with the notion of what better in what better ways the civilization can stand, in what better ways the pillars of civilization can be maintained. And it's all based on the foundation of our view of the world and the major story we're telling ourselves. We found something unique. The way our stories found himself, like all the stories of the people found themselves coming into one common position was technology. Technology gave man an ability to become a collective mind. This collective mind, in its early stages, was through writing. It was, how can I say it? It was objective movement. Then it became subjective movement. Then there was a sort of subjective momentum, uniqueness, some sort of unique pattern of intelligence within the being that wanted to communicate outside. This is why even Noam Chomsky and Steven Pinker, they have that meaning was there before language, before symbolic ascribing of like before we ascribe the subjective symbol to an objective phenomena. There's a saying that says the world is your oyster, something like that. That means it's all like, who can tell the author, like what instructions can an author need uh, for writing when he has an empty page in front of him. Emptiness has no judgment. Emptiness, in some sense, is the silence. Meditation is learning from the silence and stillness of your intelligence, advanced communication, and how I use the term, every person who listens to these talks, every person is, they just don't know. They're all advanced communicators because they're advanced communicators of the universal sector. Pretty much the purpose of life is not sometimes that it has to be a certain ideological design, or you need to have a certain blueprint to life only. Life is, it's kind of like you gotta let the world happen as you do, and you gotta let your sense of self also happen as the world does. After you have learned from yourself, you will return to the world. After you have learned from the world, you will return to yourself. Eventually, as this is repeated through the eons, the being will eventually stop. And you don't know what the power of stopping something, because often before mistakes are made, that's the only hope. Stop the mistake from ever occurring. Stop the inefficiency from ever being there. If the past cannot change its mind, how can we expect that from the future? If we could not attempt difference in view, how could we, in some sense, how can I say it? It's as if our effort is important to who our children's children's children think we were. The roars of a higher intelligent clarity are being heard all over this universal sector. Let the mind be playful with the subtler planes of abstraction and imagination. You're piloting your imagination with your attention to reality. As you pilot your attention with just only reality, eventually imagination will be left. And I'm going to share this quote from, it's ascribed to Albert Einstein, where he says, what does he say? Imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited, whereas imagination embraces the entire world, stimulating progress, giving birth to evolution. I find what he means by imagination is that before you feel you know something, you don't know it. And that moment of not knowing is profound because there's a freedom for you to know anything. Anyways, I hope this talk has served you. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Much blessings and namaste. When machine eyes open to the beyond. As the journey of the feet end at the top of the mountain, the journey of the wings of the mind collective states of being are left to be explored. We are all pioneers of an ever-present moment. Much blessings and namaste.